All right, everybody. We are back again. All right. Good to see you guys again. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Sun, Mr. Bronow, it is a pleasure to see you both. And I assume one or both of you are going to do the presentation for the fiscal analysis portion of the general plan. Yes, you are, Mr. Bronow.
What I was going to do is kind of give a quick 5-minute
That
sort
is
of summary,
perfect.
because if you recall, we met March 29th.
I do
when
recall.
We had the presentation, and then there was no time for questions. So
I do recall.
Okay.
Yes.
So thinking to do a quick 5-minute presentation on the slides to kind of set the stage.
To remind us of what we supposedly are
Exactly.
supposed to be remembering.
Right,
Okay,
yes.
thank you.
And we have to do that also. So
Appreciate
it's been 3 months. So.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate
So,
the fact
yeah.
that, and I may ask some questions that I've already asked. No, we didn't ask any questions, so I'm good.
Right.
All right, okay.
All right. So I'll begin. So as you recall, HOCO by Design is a fiscal impact analysis, or the HOCO by Design fiscal impact analysis was developed by DPZ in consultation with the Budget Office. So the Budget Office was really instrumental to this, so I really want to thank Holly and her team. We really began this process in using the fiscal year 2022 because we looked at scenarios during the evaluation stage of HOCO by Design. And then as we moved further along and we refined the plan, we updated the fiscal analysis to look at the 2023 budget. And what I'm going to be presenting today includes those final results based on the FY23 budget. So the purpose of the FIA is to inform HOCO by Design. It's important to note that it will not be adopted as part of HOCO by Design, unlike other appendices that are in the plan that will be adopted. HOCO by Design or the fiscal impact analysis is really intended to be used as a tool to help evaluate the land use plan in HOCO by Design. A little bit of background. This fiscal impact analysis was vetted quite a bit by different parties, in particular the Spending Affordability Advisory Committee. We met with them on 4 times to review and discuss the analysis last December and January. And it was a very valuable process. There's several economists on that SAC, other experts, school board members, et cetera. So we had very good discussions with the SAC, presenting this to them. And we actually made some assumptions, changes based on feedback from the SAC. And we can talk about those today if there's questions on those. The SAC prepared a report on the fiscal impact analysis in January 2023. I believe that was submitted as part of CB 28, which is the HOCO by Design submission for legislation, which summarizes the fiscal impact analysis really from the lens of what the Spending Affordability Advisory Committee thought about it in their review. So the SAC found that the fiscal analysis was solid in both methodology and results. They did suggest, as I mentioned, alternative scenario test runs, and those are listed A through E. In the presentation that I gave back in March, we didn't go through those, but I brought those slides if there are questions related to those. So what I had presented was really the result of after the SAC reviewed it, and we made changes based on their recommendations. And we can go into those, as I mentioned, in detail if we'd like to. So the SAC, the report basically says they believe the methodology and assumptions of the revised fiscal impact analysis are reasonable, and the results showing significant positive net fiscal gains from the projected new development are valid. And so what are the results? This chart summarizes the results, basically. So we did an analysis over 18 years from 2022, since we used the FY 2023 budget beginning in 2022 through the end of the plan time frame, which is 2040, so it's 18 years. The average annual results were about $58 million per year. In year 1, the results were $30 million, and then in year 18, it's $96 million. So basically what that means is growth continues along as designed in the plan. The fiscal impacts each year increase over time, which basically is showing that new growth does pay for itself. It's important to keep in mind that this 58 million average, or 18-year average, is about, I think, 4% of the 1.2 $1.4 billion fire budget and the general plan or the general fund budget. So it's significant, but it's marginal, right? You have to look at it from a marginal perspective. Why are those results? Primarily property tax and fire tax, between property tax and fire tax, which is part of the property tax, and the one-time, and the income tax is about 90% of the revenues. So new growth generates, particularly the housing, obviously, the income tax and also the property tax generated as those 25,000 new units are built over time, over 18 years. Those are the primary revenues. The other important revenue source are the one-time revenues, and those are, we call those capital revenues, and they basically consist of the transfer tax, the road excise tax, and the school surcharge. So combined, the average annual raise from that, based on the tax collected at time of building permit for residential and non-residential uses, the residential pays a school surcharge, the non-residential doesn't, but the residential and the non-residential both pay the transfer tax and road excise tax. That's a significant amount of one-time revenues, amounting to about 46 million on an average annual basis. The major costs are the public school system, which is about 57 million on an average annual basis over 18 years. And the public safety is the next greatest cost, which includes both police and fire and corrections. And as far as capital costs are concerned, the major capital costs are from the Howard County Public School System. And all total, those add up to the 58 million average annual over the 18 years. And I mentioned in year one, the net fiscal impact is about 29 million, and in year 18, the net fiscal impact is about 96 million. So if you add up the cumulative effects, it's about an additional $1.06 billion over 18 years, and that can be compared to the current budget of $1.4 billion to put that in perspective. So new growth generates positive net revenues over time. So the conclusions basically, so new growth generates positive fiscal impacts based on the current levels of service. So it's important we use current levels of service, which means, for example, if you look at the police department, how many officers are there per capita? And so it's assuming the current levels of service moving forward. It's not an increase or a decrease in levels of service over time into the future. As I mentioned, the largest revenue sources come from property and income taxes, about 90%. And that's the 90% is the result that's in the fiscal impact analysis in the model. And that also comports to about what we're receiving today in the current year budget of about 90% come from property and income taxes. Also, one-time revenues, as I mentioned, the school surcharge, which is an excise tax, road excise tax, and the transfer and recordation taxes are also important in terms of revenues coming into the county. Those one-time revenues are intended to help contribute towards the capital costs for new infrastructure, roads and schools in particular. The most significant costs, as I mentioned, are the school system, both capital and operating costs. And the report really concludes there are challenges ahead. So despite the fact that the fiscal impacts are positive, this has been discussed. I think this was discussed in a really good question raised at the growth, at the work session we had with the county council on the growth chapter. The sort of the competition of needing to maintain and rebuild existing infrastructure. So that's going to continue as the county ages. We have existing infrastructure that will need to be maintained as we build new infrastructure to accommodate new growth. That's also pointed out in the HOCO by design, this sort of balancing that needs to be done. So it's acknowledged and recognized. The SAC in particular raised that point and recommended that I think they use the term needs versus wants, basically look at what we need and try to plan for the cost to maintain and rebuild existing infrastructure as the county grows. The fact that new growth does generate net positive fiscal impacts, basically meaning it brings in more revenues than it's spending, that extra revenue can help contribute to the existing infrastructure needs. And so the second to last bullet point sort of alludes to that. Growth is built into the fiscal structure of the county. The county's been growing since the 40s, 50s in particular. And the county has been adopting annual budgets for that half-century time period and longer. So when you have that kind of situation, you apply things like excise taxes, or you create things like excise taxes and school charges, knowing that this new growth is a revenue source. So as that new growth is sort of built into the fiscal structure of the county, to the extent that that changes, if it increases or slows down, that's going to require, a look at how the budget will be impacted by that. Or levels of services may need to be adjusted. In other words, we may not be able to maintain the same levels of service if indeed growth begins to slow or change over time. So that's just something that also came out in HOCO by Design, and it's an important consideration to think about moving forward. So I think that's it. That's a quick summary of the results. And as I mentioned, I have the slides and more details if questions come up about how we did the methodology, et cetera.
Thank you, Mr. Brunel. That was very succinct with a lot of information. I forgot to welcome my council colleague, Mr. Youngman, who has joined us in person, so I'm not the only one here now. Ms. Walsh, I believe she's still with us virtually?
Yes, I am.
There she is. Okay. So I'm going to, Mr. Youngman, do you want to start? Do you want me to start? If you want me to start, I will, but I'm happy. Oh, I'm happy. I was going to. Okay, but I was like, okay, I'm happy to let you start. But all right, here we go. Okay. These are sort of big questions. They're not about the specific numbers, okay? So my first question, is there a target percentage of homeownership versus rentership that strikes a healthy balance? Would it be possible to run an alternative fiscal impact model that looked at various ownership versus rentership models?
The short answer is yes. You can run scenarios on much of anything, and that's one of the values of these kinds of analyses. For purposes of the analysis that I just presented, we assumed for the rental or the multifamily properties, 90% were rental and 10% were condo. And we assumed that because it reflects what we thought is really the current market. Most things that are being built today are rental apartments. And
what if we did 75-25?
So
how
we
would
could-
that change the numbers?
Yeah, we could. I don't know the answer to that, but we could. That's something that a fiscal analysis could do. If
I would
you were
love to see that. I would love to see some other alternatives to 90-10. That's right. That would be very interesting. I would also ask, did you guys ever look at the last general plan and see how the fiscal analysis, I assume you did a fiscal analysis 10 years ago.
Yes, yeah, we did. And also for the 2000 general plan, fiscal analyses were done for both of those.
So did you look at that and see how accurate it was?
I guess I would.
Can we see it?
Well, yeah, we could see it. We could pull it out. The interesting thing is, though, is that if you remember the first bullet point, it's really not designed to be a budget tool. Like, it doesn't predict the actual budget because it's a marginal analysis, meaning that it doesn't include sort of the existing base of housing and employment. So it doesn't project the budget as a whole moving forward. It just looks at what's the fiscal impacts of new growth.
I understand.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's really not intended to. And the other kind of caveat is that this is sort of a snapshot in time. It's an analysis tool intended to look at sensitivity analyses testing. For example, the SAC said, what if we raise interest rates to 6.5%, mortgage rates to 6.5% given 5%? Or like you said, what if we do 75% condos versus 25% and 25% rentals?
Well, I really meant 75% rentals versus and 25% condos.
Okay. All right.
But it would actually be even more interesting to do 50-50.
So I guess what I'm saying is that, but in that interim, taxes change, inflation happens.
A million things
So
happen.
it's really hard to sort of compare. That's
Right.
what I'm saying.
I understand.
Yeah.
A million things happen. And I could go through this document and say, what about this? What about that? What about this? Did you include this? And in fact, many of my questions are right along those lines, okay? And some of it, but that's why I'm starting with these broader questions, because I think the broader questions are the ones that are probably more critical, getting more information. I mean, of course, developers want us to say that more development pays for itself. I mean, that's a given here in Howard County, that the county will say that. But here's the other question I would ask. Given that we are the second smallest county in the state of Maryland geographically, and that of that small amount of area that we have, 39% is taken up, but with parkland, open space, and easements. Approximately, thank you for reminding me of that again this morning. I don't know, you look at a map, I'm not totally sure with the exact number, but it looks like 50% to me is not in the PSA, the public service area, which means there's no, for people who are listening, there's no water or sewer out to that area, which very much limits the amount of development we'll ever have there. So that just leaves one very small part of our county, most of which has been heavily developed, heavily. And as we know, according to DPZ, 2% of the land left is developable. I assume that at some point, we actually are not going to grow anymore. We actually are not. That's actually going to happen. Unless we say we're willing to spend $1 million a mile to put in water and sewer in the PSA, outside the area that is not right now, not within the PSA. So unless we're willing to do that, I am assuming there will, based on the assumptions that we have today and what we know today in 2023, that there will be a point in time at which Howard County will not grow. And if we were to follow this general plan, pretty much everything that you could redevelop, almost every major parking lot and every shopping center is now an activity center. I don't know where else we could even redevelop. But so I'm thinking, I don't know where we go beyond this. Howard County may be in a place where it doesn't grow. So I'm wondering, where have you guys looked at any jurisdictions where the growth is extremely limited, where maybe there's 50 new houses a year or 45 new apartments, but very small amount of growth, either because of the size or the environment that is surrounded in that jurisdiction, or it's just not a popular county, and we won't name any of those counties, but maybe not a popular county to move to for whatever reason. So those are my questions, big questions.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the first thought I have on that is what you're saying is so Howard County is in a transition point where we're changing and moving into a redevelopment community and not a greenfield development. This plan it really began with the last plan, but this plan, even more particular, is sort of navigating that transition. At some point, when all those activity centers are filled up in 20, 30 years, a scenario like you said, I could see happening. But I would caveat it, not saying by no growth, but change, because things continually change, and it's very slow. So maybe 3 decades from now, there will, I would imagine, be continued redevelopment opportunities, because now things are 30 years old than what they are today. So it won't be growth like we've seen in the past, that's true, but there will be continued, I guess, change and redevelopment. And as far as communities, I think that's happening in communities across the country. I don't have any specific communities in mind. I don't know if we've looked into that as far as
Like what's the financial, what's the outlook, the financial perspective for communities then that don't grow as fast or don't grow much?
Right. I think that they make it work, right? You adjust the budget to reflect the new reality.
Mm-hmm.
So I
I mean,
think,
you
yeah.
also save on things. I
Yeah.
mean, we've been building schools at an incredible pace for decades now. So not having to build a $110 million high school, that's a savings. And hire all the teachers that you would need to hire in order to operate those schools. But I'm going to stop because it looks like you're finally ready to ask a question, Mr.
Actually,
Youngman.
could I
Yes.
could I suggest that perhaps Matt Newcaster chime in? So remember, he's with us, so I don't know if he could speak to
Yeah,
any
maybe he has some
experience or
insights
knowledge
about-
he has about a variety of jurisdictions and where they are in their kind of evolution as it pertains to how they grow, how they change and evolve. But I just want to say that I think we do have examples in our own state where we see what happens as a result of decline. When no longer there are opportunities to live there, or perhaps they're just so I think that we just need to be.
I'm going to assume that Howard County will never decline, that people will always, even if we're not growing, that we're not declining. And the reason why we're not declining is because we will always have such an excellent school system. So that will always attract people to this county, even if we're not adding another 2,000 apartments every year, people will still want to move here because it's such a great place to live. So I'm thinking more along the lines of what happens if it stays the same?
Right.
If we end up sort of maxing out at 365,000. We're
Right.
at 340 now.
Right. So, got a couple answers to that, but let me call on Matt. Matt, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. It's actually a fascinating question, and really depending on where you are in the region of the United States, people are already experiencing this. I know you didn't want to go into decline, but a lot of the projects we do up in the Northeast, they're just trying to hold on to the people they have and trying to balance their budgets that way. Other places we do work, they are kind of towing the line or trying to figure out what life is like, more to status quo condition. Generally, what happens on the fiscal impact spotlight of that is the infrastructure you have will continue to deteriorate, to age, to need maintenance. And so, as Jeff had mentioned in his opening and the conversation that's in the general plan, HOCO by Design general plan, is we have to have our eyes wide open about the percentage of your money that will be going to maintaining infrastructure, both now and in the future as it continues to age. And so that becomes a really big topic to be looking at. It's you don't get quite as many shiny new things and ribbons cut all the time because that new growth isn't there to help grow the denominator or to bring in new revenues from one-time fees. So it is an issue you have to kind of look at, and it will require some tough decisions about prioritization as you go through, and maintenance will have to be one of them. As we say in the plan, if you defer the maintenance, it tends to be just more sudden and more expensive. So you're going to have to look at it that way as well. But again, most of the communities we work in, for example, some that have like several bridges over a major river and stuff, they'll tell me that they don't even think about new projects anymore because all they can do is maintain what they have. And so that's something you'll have to consider from a fiscal impact standpoint as you go, and whether there are additional mechanisms or routines you'll need to follow to exact more funding out of existing residents rather than relying on new growth.
Thanks, Matt. Mr. Youngman?
I think just to close out that topic before I ask my question, Jeff made a comment about making budget adjustments. Well, government doesn't shrink, and I think that's the thing to keep in mind is, once you start flattening down that growth and those one-time revenues aren't coming in, it's not like we just grow by inflation. Government, because people always demand that bigger, better mousetrap. So, a no-growth scenario is kind of scary because infrastructure gets old. And that leads to my question, which was, I get that, you kind of did a per capita of, same level of service. But I think there's the two big things that jump up to me that need to be accounted for is Kerwin, which is going to escalate not just a rounding error, but quite a bit, the sort of per student cost in the school system. And I don't know if you did that on per student, didn't you? You didn't do per capita because you did student yields, right?
Correct, yeah.
Right. So I think that we've got to look at that number, not just being sort of inflation over the 17,000, but the base might be 20. And then sort of escalating infrastructure maintenance, because, what we're starting to see is, because the county grew so quickly in a short period of time, let's say, over half of our road and water and sewer infrastructure might have gone in like a 20-year period, and it's got a certain life, and a school building's got a certain life, and half our schools, I think, were built in like a 20-year period. So are those capital costs just going to kind of grow at sort of what we would call the same level of service, or are those costs going to continue to escalate as big stuff starts to break? I mean, we don't really have water and sewer repairs much right now, when we don't. I mean, every night you turn on the news, you hear about, something in the city falling apart, because I just think it gets to that age and it all starts to fall apart. And we don't really even have those costs right now, except on the margin. So, when we talk about, are there ways to change assumptions and do a little stress test on the model, which is what you and Deb were talking about, I think that what I would like to see is us being a little bit more, I don't want to say conservative, but a little bit closer to the worst case scenario versus just sort of the current scenario on some of those. We can do that, right?
I can start a little bit from my perspective. I'm sure Jeff have a more detailed on the technical side on that there, since some of these are really important, big concepts to discuss on that. So a couple of things. One is that
Dr. Sun, can you get closer to that microphone?
Can you hear me?
Need to hear you
Yes.
outside.
Yes. Sorry about
I can
that.
hear you.
Holly Sun, Budget Administrator. So it's a couple of things. One is that it really, I think what you just talked about there, Ms. Yaman, is not just about the new development. It's really about the whole budget,
Right.
whole budget now and also future. It is an issue of prioritization. So let's just assuming the pie doesn't change on the revenue, on the static viewpoint on that there. Obviously, in reality, it does grow every year, but the costs also grow every year, right? So there's a pie. Then the issue is, how do you reallocate to some extent? And that's a tough decision every year. I mean, you are here every year on the annual budget discussion. It's never easy. It's a lot of debate about where to go. Like use capital budgets as an example. There are critical, let's just say last 6 years, for example, there are some critical new projects has been incurred. Years ago, there was a courthouse. That was a big project. Elk City is very important, big new project there. And a new school project, obviously, multiple new school projects, especially in the high school. These are really high, somewhere between 130 to 270 million project each on that. And the county's geo bond ability is only 75 million a year. So the whole 6 year, you only have a few hundred million total. This just big project. These are important big projects themselves. They're already part. And on top of that, you have other huge maintenance needs, no matter it's roads, systemic renovation in education entities in the counties there, and pipelines, the ponds, all those different things, transportation every year. But all these has to be addressed, and the whole group, I would say, collectively from both legislative and executive side, together with other partners, including our state delegates, have been working very hard to try to get other sources, state aid, dedicated funding towards that. But it's still always very tight. So every you have to decide how much you can use for maintenance versus keep some of the new project going versus other. And sometimes I think people are doing best based on what you can do in that margin. And there are not too much wiggle room to say that, because there are so much conditions going on you have to address there. At some point, that if we are having a little more flexibility, I really agree with everyone, and which is SAC report has been repeated, emphasized. As a county agent, this systemic renovation, no matter it's roads or pipeline, everything, water and sewer, as Ms. Youngman just mentioned there, those are several $100 million of cumulative needs in the next 10 years. Also try to do repair and renovation and replacement on that. All those things are really overwhelming. We have to be able to allocate more funding source in terms of allocation resource. But again, you have to stage it that and prioritize and look at all other needs as well. That's just the one point I want to basically echo on that, the importance on that, but you have to take time and also kind of look at everything as a big package every single year to see what is the capacity that you can make that kind of adjustment. The other thing is this is also the prioritization is about assuming the pie doesn't change at this point. What you're talking about is a reallocation between different things rather than unless you have a different discussion, that will be different. You change the pie, that's different. So the reallocation is that just to go back to the technical discussion about the fiscal impact analysis for the HOCO design, they use a base as fiscal 23 operating NCIP as a base. So they were saying per capita or per student, how much cost is this and that, on that. If we're saying, hey, the infrastructure really should be a bigger, maintenance a bigger one, then you should assume something else be a smaller portion. And if they do analysis, that's like per capita cost for this will be high, but per capita cost for something else will be lower to do the exercise there. That's not necessarily end up, again, being like costing too much more. It's more like you reallocate it to other pieces there.
I'm going to jump in, thanks. I get that this isn't the whole budget, right? This is just
the marginal impact.
The marginal impact of this, right? So I think that because this analysis is limited, certainly the lever of cost per student, the county's share of cost per student, I think needs to be adjusted. And I know we're going to have to adjust it in the entire budget at some point. But, let's say that has nothing to do with the general plan. But certainly the variable used for new students as a result of this new development should reflect what I think is going to be reality in 5 years, let's say. And then on the infrastructure, it's hard because certainly you're saying that the new infrastructure that goes in as a result of these folks is the stuff that's not going to break. That's all we're looking at is the cost to put that new infrastructure in. And I get that, but it's happening during a time of escalating costs on the maintenance. But I guess we just have to keep that wall up between what is the current budget and whatever the profit in this is you use to deal with those other issues.
Right.
So, I guess for the purposes of this, the escalating infrastructure maintenance isn't really something that we would be looking to adjust in the model, but I do think we need to really get a firm grasp on what our per kid cost is going to be under Kerwin.
Just really quickly, it might be good to point out this slide here because it relates to exactly what you were talking about, Mr. Youngman. We had discussions. I don't know if the slide could be pulled up so people can see it. Oh, perfect. So the budget office and DPZ, there was a lot of discussion about this concept. And our goal is to produce, I would say we were conservative, meaning we wanted to try to incur as many costs as we could, is one way to look at it. So we added this actually to the model. And so this comes from the capital budget, the school capital budget in FY23. And this is actually, I have a copy of the 24, but it's always the line items at the bottom of the budget. So basically it includes large items like systemic renovations, playground equipment replacement, roofing projects, et cetera. So we built this into the fiscal model. So not only did the fiscal model incur the capital costs for like a brand new school for the new growth, it also on a per student basis, marginal per student basis, incurred this cost of about $900 per student each year. I'm sorry, not $580 each year per student built into the model to basically incorporate these systemic renovation costs. Now, granted, that doesn't.
Where's the new school construction cost in there? Which line item is
Yeah,
that?
it's on another slide. I could
In this
hunt
slide.
for it and
But this
bring
is
that up.
embedded kind of
This
in
is,
the
I'm just saying that this
operating
is embedded in the analysis. This concept of systemic renovations, we built it into the fiscal model,
Okay.
trying to anticipate that as you build a new school, they're also going to need to renovate it. You'll have to need a new roof and things of that, HVAC and all that kind of stuff. Now, it doesn't incur the cost of a total school replacement.
Right.
So that gets back to what we were
Or
talking
a
about
brand new
before.
school a total school replacement, or
Yeah.
we
Which-
need a new school because we have so many kids.
Which could occur in 40 years from now, right? So it's a
Could
20-year
occur
fiscal model.
5 years from now.
No, I mean, to have to rebuild.
Oh, right,
rebuild
right.
school.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
And then also to kind of answer this question, I looked at the recent FY24 capital budget that was just adopted, just curious to see in the school capital budget, it seems like the county is not doing too bad of a job in terms of allocating money to rehab. So if you look at the 10-year total, the 10-year budget, about 60% of the money adopted in this capital budget goes towards replacement, Oakland Mills replacement, Dunlogan replacement, applications and research lab renovation. If you look at the most on the funded FY24 actually funded budget, not the 10-year plan, it's 72% of the funds in the budget are for renovation/replacement costs. So it's not like we're just taking all the money and building new schools. Now, the last few years we probably did because of the high school, right? But, if you look at the 10 years
And
moving
Talbot
forward,
Springs
it's about
and
60%,
Hammond.
which are
Yeah.
replacement schools.
Yes.
Yeah, so it is a renovation aspect. So I would say that the county's certainly not perfect, and there's a lot of deferred maintenance and unmet needs, but they are being addressed in a fairly significant way.
What's the, and I know this is probably in the detail somewhere, but in year 18, what's the increase in students? Let's say at 58,000 now. And I know it's going to be a little off because you were using 2021 baseline, and we're actually down from that, but I think we could kind of.
I have that in here. Let me pull it up here.
And the reason why I'm asking is, just using the numbers in this model of what the funding level was, the county funding level was 620 on that 59,000 students. And, we're told just to be on pace to phase in Kerwin, they needed another $100 million this year. So I don't know to fully phase in Kerwin even what that number is. But let's say that 620 is really 720. And that's another, 1,600, a kid, times, how many students. Are we adding 20,000 kids to the county through the general plan, or?
Yeah, so I have it up here. So this is the chart that details the school projections. It's about 7,000 school children over the 18 years, new school
Okay.
children.
Okay.
It's about, I think it's an average of like 390 a year, something like that,
Okay.
which makes sense. It's the same relative pace of growth we've been experiencing in HOCO by design. The land use plan continues that pace moving forward for the most part.
So my recollection is that we were adding closer to 1,000 kids a year up until like 2019. I mean, the year before COVID, it looked like we slowed down a little, maybe 788, but 390 was not what we were experiencing.
Yeah, I don't recall those specific numbers. In my mind, it's around 500 average over the last 10 years, something like that. One reason why it's a little lower is because the HOCO by design is projecting a higher percentage of rental apartments.
Yes,
smaller
you know
units,
that you and I disagree
studios
on
and one bedrooms,
what
right?
that
So
will
they have
mean
less
for
kids.
student
Yeah.
yield, but okay.
Well, I think that ultimately, and we got to run it through the budget, but if you just sort of eyeball it, you're looking at 1,600, an increase of 1,600 bucks a kid. Forget about the impact on the budget that we were just talking about for, the kids we have. But at 7,300 students, incrementally, in today's dollars, it's another 12, 13 million bucks. So, you sit here and you look at your 96 million, and, is that number really 82 million, 83 million. That's where I'm trying to get at, is, that 96 million doesn't leave us a lot of wiggle room because we're dealing with pretty big numbers.
Because of the change in the level of service due to
Yeah.
the state, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a couple points to make on that. It is a good point. A couple points related to that is that, so number one, the model, if you just not even talk about everything else, just for inflation there, it will increase every year. So the 10 years from now, 20 years from now, the cost, what's built in the model already reflect a significant increase on that there in terms of per student cost, per capita, public safety services, all the things were already captured on that there. So that's part. And with that, it's also assumed that, just use that every year, the county's contribution to the school, just use that as inflation trend. That's an increase of quite some dollar amount every year, and that's reflected for per student level. That's factored in.
You're right. I underestimated that.
Yeah,
Because that 1,600 is today's dollars, and there's
Yes.
inflation in this model.
right.
So it's
But the inflation in this model.
1,600 inflated over 18 years that comes off this 96 million.
The other thing is that, no, I would say the cost side on that, we already captured the cost increase in that there. The other part is the blueprint there is a very significant effort from the state, initiated by the state legislation there. It does require different school system to reprioritize and focus on their estimated pillar items there. And they also anticipate or committed on significant increase of state funding to help out on that there. So it's really not necessarily all those increase there is on top of everything else of the school system. They ask for reprioritization.
So that 100 million that I said they were short, if that's all real Kerwin, you're saying that, maybe the county incurs 2/3 of that, and the state's still going to be trying to eat some
The
of that
state,
as well.
yeah, the
We
state
hope.
should have quite a piece in that
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Okay. I think that after 49 minutes, we should let District 1 ask a question.
District 1, Ms. Liz Walsh, would you like to ask a question?
No, thank you.
Was that a no, thank you? I think it was. Yes.
It was.
Okay. All right. Well, then I have a few more questions. Just let us know. Liz, if you want to ask a question, just interrupt us, okay? Since we can't see
I
you.
will.
Okay. I know you will. Okay. Inflation. Let's get back to that because this is a follow-up to what David just brought up. So you used 2.5%? Is that what you used? 2.5% inflation? Yes.
Yes.
And this year we had 6% inflation. So why did you use such a low number?
So that's a very good question, and we spent some time with the Spending Affordability Advisory Committee on this question, and we did some research looking up economic projections from the CBO, and so I have that chart. I can pull this up. I think it helps to answer your question. So let me see here. Okay, yeah, so if you look at the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which is like the third column down under the inflation subtitle there, this was their projection. I think it was as of 2022, so the end of last year. So the actual 2021 inflation rate, CPI, was 4.7%, which is, as you said, greater than 2.5% for sure. In 2022, I think that was an estimate at the time when they did this at 6.1%, and then they project forward. So according to the CBO, the projection of inflation, at least everybody's hope, is that it's going to go back down if you see the out years to 2032 to around the 2.3, 2.4 level. It's also, I think, the target rate of the Fed. Is that right? Or is it Fed's like 3%? I don't remember. But so the intention is that on average over 18 years, inflation will be about 2.5%, according to the CBO.
Yeah, and one thing to add to that is for a long-term trend analysis there, it's what matters most is the general trend or baseline because it's an assumption there. It's very difficult to be accurate on individual years because some years will be higher, some years will be lower. It's more important to look at the trend because that's what the model will give you in general, the direction and general magnitude, not necessarily down to the dollar.
Right, which is exactly why I'd like to see the trend from the last general plan that we did and what happened over the course of those, I guess now 12 years. What was the trend? What was the inflation rate during that period of time? What was the student growth rate? How much money? If you could replicate what you did for this fiscal analysis, the first couple of pages, I think that would be really helpful. I mean, it beta tests what we're doing here. And again, I don't believe that we can be accurate going 18 years out. I totally agree with you, Dr. Sun. There's no way to predict that much in the future. We don't know if we're going to have a huge recession, and you do always mention this could be the year, okay? This could be the year that we have the recession. Or we could be $100 million over, what was our predicted revenue again, for whatever reason. Who knows? Hopefully it won't be because of COVID. And that's why I know that you put a lot of work into this, but I don't put a lot of stock into these numbers going out 18 years. Because I just think there's too many things that we have to assume, too many assumptions that we don't know. That is another reason why I'd like to see the last 10 years.
Isn't the bust in looking at it that way, though, that we didn't build nearly the housing allocations? I mean, wouldn't the old fiscal impact analysis, or not old, but the one, the last general plan, it would have assumed that you built all the units that you built, right?
It probably would. It's been a while. We can take a look at that and see.
I bet we still beat revenue, though.
Yeah.
Well, of course we beat revenue.
I bet we still beat
Revenue was
revenue.
unbelievable for the last, 3 years. So that was, that was significant.
And could be ahead of cost, too, just because, I mean, like this year,
Right.
you look at what we had to do with.
Yeah.
But if we're only putting rental apartments in, 90% of what we're putting in is rental apartments versus the single-family detached homes, which is a big part of, as we know, where we keep increasing that revenue because the assessed values of the homes keep increasing, which means that the property tax is increased. And I don't know how that plays out with apartment buildings. That's another thing. I mean, our apartment buildings, is it like 10 apartment buildings? The property value of 10 apartment buildings equals 70 detached homes. I mean, I would love it if you could play around a little bit. I think one of my questions here was I asked, earlier if there's a target percentage of home ownership versus rentership. And really, is there a target percentage of people who are going to pay their individual property taxes, which will probably rise every year? Because I believe Howard County will never go into decline, okay? So those property, and what if we put, not just condos, but, took again, playing around with these numbers a little bit. Where can we be more comfortable that 18 years in the future, we will still be in a positive, in the green and not in the red?
Right.
Or in the black, I guess is, yeah.
Yeah, so this question came up before, and there was actually, I would refer you, I think we might have sent it to the county council. What you're referring to is a prototype analysis. What's the fiscal impacts of a SFD compared to a townhouse, compared to a rental apartment? And so this was conducted by a company called Urban Analytics not too long ago in 2019. It was a fiscal impact consultant that the county contracted with in a question that the SAC had of what the impact of changes to Apfo were or would be back in 2018. And so they determined that the getting to the question of how many apartments to SFDs would match, right? So SFDs clearly are the biggest fiscally positive land use in the county primarily because of the high cost for these units. So they have a high property tax, and they also have a high income tax receivables because the people have to have a high income to afford that house.
You're
Exactly.
welcome.
So according to this, it's $5,000 per unit for SFD, $3,500 per unit for an SFA, and about $1,000 for a rental apartment. So an SFD, according to this study, is 5 times fiscally positive than a rental apartment. Condo, by the way, is $4,100. So it's primarily because you have the property tax and the income tax, and it would be based on the condos that we have here in the county as well. So that's on a per unit basis.
Can you send that to us again, Jeff?
Yeah, we can.
You don't have to send us the whole thing, just that page
So
would be great.
Right.
Just to kind of ask a kind of follow-up question. So that's on a per unit basis. So if we're looking at multifamily condo development in a more targeted, smaller area, then how much does that generate?
Right.
From a size perspective, from a
Sure.
land size perspective versus
Two
large.
houses in my neighborhood are going to take up 3 acres. You're going to get 10 grand, but you can put 100
Condos.
condos or even apartments
50-50.
at the $1,000
Condos.
number. So, yeah. But that's where the student yield has to come in. So like, if I don't have to provide expensive services to all of those extra people, then you build apartments forever because it's just taxes, on every little piece of land. But, the service component takes over, so that's, so.
Right, and that actually gets to the next question, whether if you're adding 90,000 people in apartments, well, you're adding I'm sorry, I said 90,000, I didn't mean, I misspoke. Well, I misspoke, but, so you're looking at maybe 31,000 units, well, it could be 90,000 people. And it could be, of those 90, it could be, 75,000 people in apartments. Well, those people need more services. If we were adding 75,000 people in single-family detached homes, which I know we will not ever be doing, because there is literally not the physical space in Howard County to do. But if we were adding 75,000 people in single-family detached homes versus 75,000 people in apartments, would those 75,000 people in apartments need more services? Or if you couldn't add 75,000 people in single-family detached homes, let's say you could only add 20,000, because that's how much room there is left to build for single-family detached homes, then, I just think that that goes back, I guess, to the question I originally asked. What's the healthy balance?
Yeah.
Where does it actually become, if you're adding 90% apartments versus 10% everything else, and then you're adding 75,000 people as opposed to maybe many fewer people if you weren't building so many apartments, but you were building other things instead, even just a fourplex instead of a big apartment building, or a threeplex, or whatever other types of housing we might be able to build instead of big apartment building after big apartment building. Where is the balance there that says, well, we may not run out of money, we may be just fine if our growth continues along this line? That's another, it's a big question, again.
Yeah. So I'll kick it off, and then Jeff, I'm absolutely going to kick it over to you. So So one thing that I do want to say is, right, a balance. So a part of the general plan is trying to strike a balance between our infrastructure needs to accommodate our demand, preserve and protect our environmental resources, ensure that we have housing opportunities for all. So it's a balance across all of those factors. So there has to be a give and a take throughout all of those factors. Now, nowhere are we talking about 75,000 residents. I don't think we have that population growth projection anywhere in the general plan. But specifically when it comes to single-family detached service needs versus needs that might be identified within a multifamily property, I mean, let's not forget that some of the additional infrastructure needs associated with more single-family development is road infrastructure, right? So if we have more people concentrated in a smaller space, do they have the same demands of roads, or are there more walkable opportunities within those areas? And now let me just kind of also now, if I could just jump over to you, Jeff.
So I was just going to show this. I remember this came up before. There was a lot of numbers thrown out there, and I didn't have this information at the growth chapter work session. So here's the population projections in the fiscal model related to the land use plan in HOCO by design, and it's 58,000 total population. I apologize for this being small. This is over 18 years. In the very top sort of segment of this shows population, and it's by unit type. So of the 58,000 new people from the 25,000 units, 13,000 are in single-family detached, close to 16,000 would be in townhomes, 4,000 in condos. This is based on our 10% assumption, and 24,000 in rental apartments. And that corresponds to the chart at the very bottom, which shows the unit projections by planning area for each of those unit types. So of the 25,000 units, about 12,000 are rental apartments. And that's, based on the flume in the HOCO by design, based on the fact that the plan is talking about constructing an activity centers. There is no land left really in the future for the same number of single-family detached homes that we've had in the past, given
Right.
to the 2%. So
Right.
this is sort of the shift, the transition that the county is going through.
That 7,123 includes downtown Columbia, right? Apartments?
Yes.
Okay.
Because if we build all downtown Columbia apartments, then that pretty much two per apartment is probably going to be high. Like you probably have,
Right.
senior apartments
That's
also.
15,000
You
right
might be a
there,
little
yeah.
bit less than that.
Could
but,
be, exactly, yeah. 'Cause
Yes.
right.
But then you throw in the affordable projects where you have to build the 2 bedrooms, you have to build the 3 bedrooms.
Yeah.
That's where you could get 4 or 5 people in an apartment unit. So
But-
that's why that mix is so important.
But Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that a lot of our population estimates are really based on our actual population. Like we've been looking at the census to actually factor into that.
Right, yeah, the yields here per unit are based on census numbers.
So it's actually reflecting, the demographic changes that we've been experiencing recently and moving those forward,
Which I understand, but if people around the state and even the country, because I've met many people actually outdoor knocking who don't come from the state of Maryland, who move specifically to Howard County for this school system. And if it becomes well known that it won't be long before you won't be able to move here because, or the only thing, they won't be building more. Okay, so if you want to move here, you're going to have to move into what they've got. That there might be even more of a demand, and there might be even more of a desire for people to move here with their children into apartments, and even one-bedroom apartments, just because I think that that's something that's still going on in this region and in this country when it comes to our school district. But I want to move just to a same general topic, but so I think there was another place where we anticipated there were going to be 31,000 new jobs, and that, where do I have this? Here it is. On page 3 of the fiscal analysis assumptions and methodology. Jobs, in the impact analysis, there's a chart detailing non-residential development by planning, area, and job type. It assumes a total of 31,500 jobs, most of which will occupy Columbia's AB office space, 18,197 jobs. So I did some research. There was something that just came out a couple weeks ago. It's a blogger called, the name of the blog is Montgomery Perspective. And Montgomery Perspective did I hope this isn't like what will happen in the future, but it is concerning because I think that's a lot of jobs. And they looked at total employment growth for 21-22. And Howard County was third from the bottom at 1.2%. And that was of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 areas in the Maryland, D.C., Virginia suburbs. And then they looked at total employment as a percentage of 2019, and Howard County was second from the bottom. And then they looked at total employment growth from 2007 to 22, and Howard County did much better than. They were fourth. And then they looked at private employment growth from 21-22, and Howard County was dead last of those 12 jurisdictions. And I think counting on 18,900 jobs in office space in Columbia, that actually, of all the projections that I saw, that one even more so than the kids and a lot of other things, I'm like, we just had the president of Howard Hughes here before us in May on the budget, on our county budget. And he said that office building right now is very much in flux around the country, not just here, but around the country, because nobody knows what ultimately people are going to do about going back to offices. And is there going to be as much as a 50% less demand? And that means 50% less demand of what we've got right now. What is actually there right now, let alone building new stuff. So 19,000 new jobs, that's a big number. And we're counting on a lot of people then to come in and employers to pay income taxes and commercial real estate taxes. And I assume all of that is rolled into these projections that give us $59 million more than what we would have had otherwise.
Right, yeah, not the income tax, because the fiscal model is based on land, so it's really the property tax from the office space and all that. The income tax is from the people living in homes.
Okay. But there's also this presumption that all these people will want to move here because all of these jobs will be here.
Right, right. But all those comments you said are really important and fair. I think there's three things I could say that might shed some light to that, a little bit of that, or at least offer something back to that. So number one, you're right, that is a lot of jobs. It is based on the downtown Columbia plan, which is, I think, like 2.3 million square feet of retail and 4.3 million square feet of office. So that's in the downtown plan. So it's a 30-year plan, began in 2000. We certainly recognize that the commercial and the office is not going at a quick pace, particularly because of all the things that you mentioned, the teleworking and all of that. But assuming the downtown plan does come forward, that's what's built into the model. Let me show you this slide too, because we also recognize that we're not going to experience the same level of job growth that we experienced in the past. So this chart is job growth, and a lot of the statistics that you mentioned are reflected in this, I think, in Howard County from 2000 to 2021. And so the average annual job growth over those 30 years was about 3,200 jobs per year. It was a fairly strong job growth evenly over that two-decade time period, primarily because of the base realignment and closure that occurred with in Fort Meade growth.
Rack.
That's sort of ending,
Yes.
So the 31,500 jobs averages about half of that 3,000. So we're not anticipating we're gonna grow at the same pace of 3,000 jobs because of many of the things that you mentioned. And if the market study, if I remember, they projected a demand of about 60,000 jobs, 59,000 jobs. So if those 60,000 jobs were to come forward in Howard County, it would be the same pace that we experienced for the last 20 years. According to them, that is the market demand. Now, of course, they did this study in the middle of COVID, so who knows now, right? But there's still a very strong job market in the Baltimore, Washington region. So I don't think it's wrong to think that Howard County can continue to experience rapid job growth given where we're located. The other concept of why there was only 31,500 over 18 years, which adds up to 35,000 over the 20-year period of the plan, is because, as we mentioned before, this doesn't include numbers from Gateway. The plan calls for a potential master plan for Gateway, but we didn't want to presume what that would result in. But there's been some estimates that there could be as many 25,000 jobs in Gateway if we were to become like a innovative campus sort of setting. And that would get you to the 60,000 jobs that the market consultant estimates would be the demand for. But all the things that you said are big questions, right? What is the future of office space given the trends that we're experiencing now? So it's a big question. It's an important question.
David?
So on the one-time revenues, the transfer taxes, so is that just transfer taxes, like the initial transfer tax on the initial sales of these new units, or is that assume like an aftermarket continued, almost like a same store of just having more houses?
Right. I think it assumes every 15 years a house resells.
Okay.
And so the transfer tax goes.
So transfer taxes is, it's not a huge number, but let's say for the purposes of the model, if at the end of year 18, we stop growing, that's it, we're done, most of that transfer tax is going to continue to churn. It's not just this upfront
Right.
development related. But the road excise tax, well, that's the excise tax. No, that's only on new development.
Only on new.
That's not the maintenance tax. So you've got, call it $45 million here, $47 million in year 18 that relies on a perpetuation and continuation of the growth. And, as we've talked about, like at some point we're going to start tailing off. I think you almost have to look at year 18 and say, okay, now what are we handing off to the next general plan? What's that revenue? And not to keep beating a dead horse, but we're at 96, you throw in Kerwin, we're, in the 70s, and then the recurring costs. It's like at some point there's net zero fiscal impact to 18 years of banging our heads against the wall, fighting over development and growth and all that stuff. I'm not proposing that we not grow. I think that's the reality of the fiscal impact, and that we shouldn't be justifying this growth off of this fiscal impact. Because now, are we likely to beat it? Yeah, maybe. I mean, I'll bet you that we've beaten the old fiscal impact despite not growing as much. Just because assessments have continued to go up.
Yep.
And the less we build,
Yep.
the more those assessments and resales are going to go up.
Yep.
One would hope. So, it's just, I think it's food for thought. And when we stress test those projections a little bit, I think that we might see, at some point you have to be able to pay to show a healthy ability to cover your recurring costs with your recurring revenue, not to be stuck on sort of the one time, because that's like a drug. You got to get off that carousel at some point.
Right. It's kind of built in. And so when that stops, then you're short.
And we're gradually, and if you look at it as a percentage, I think we're gradually coming off of it. The numbers look higher because we increase school surcharge so much, so that's like much bigger number now. But, what's it going to look like in 20 years when we're like, hey, you know what? We're just never going to be able to maintain that level of growth, that level of one-time revenues, but we've got all these other people living here at, these service costs, et cetera. So.
Well, I do think it's important, as you said, that the fiscal modeling is saying this is the growth that HOCO by Design is predicting, this is how and where we're going to grow, and this is the fiscal impact of that. But the growth model that was developed came from the scenario planning. It was looking at all the different ways that we can grow, getting a lot of community input that goes into that, and making sure that we are reflecting the desires of the community and the needs of the community moving forward with how we grow and where we grow. So it's not all fiscally moving forward. It's also trying to create, trying to achieve those goals that came out of that, those plans for how we want the community to look.
Well, I agree with that to the. I agree with that to the extent that that the people that were engaged in that process is a perfect cross-section of the people that live here.
Exactly.
And I'm going to argue that it's not.
I would
Because I
too.
can tell you, the people out in the West are not politically engaged. They ask me crazy questions a lot. Well, I guess everybody.
Everybody does.
I mean, they're not. I mean, I went to one of the in-person sessions out at the community centers, and there was 30 people there, but 20 of them were like the people that just sort of went to all of them that you guys probably felt like you were married to at some point. There's a dozen people, and they don't, I think you should hold out the possibility that the people engaged in this process that came to those sessions, that answered the survey, that come into this room to give us testimony aren't going to be a perfect cross-section of the county and a perfect cross-section of, where people live. So
I agree, but that's also why we bring in market studies, and that's why we bring in expertise from around the nation, and why you have a professional planning staff who focuses on these issues.
Yeah, I mean, let's face it. Most people are going to say, I'm here, I've got everything I need, lock the door, keep giving me better services, and don't raise my taxes.
But,
that's right. So
we also
knowing that we
got-
can't do that, what levers do you move?
Well, we also got, a lot of the activity center model and the scenario planning that was developed, that went into developing the growth plan that we have in this plan, was coming from the people who said, I want to live in Howard County. I don't want to live somewhere else. I want to live here, but I can't find what I want to live in. It's not here. We don't have that product here. We don't build those kind of neighborhoods that I'm looking for. So a lot of what we're looking for in the general plan is how do we protect what people value here, that they already have what they have, but also serve the people who are looking for something a little bit different, but still want to be here and still want to participate in the community. So it's that's the growth model we're coming up for, with the limited infill, limited rural development, and the higher intensity development in the activity centers to provide those neighborhoods.
But right now, this gets back to my complaint from the very beginning. It just looks like it's, I don't know, I can never quite figure out 25,000 apartments. If you talk to, like yesterday, I was talking to HCAR, and you talk to people who are in favor of growth, and obviously HCAR is one of them. They don't want 25,000 apartments. They would love to see senior housing that isn't 6,000 square feet. We had a ZRA in front of us that actually would allow senior housing, a senior housing community to limit that senior housing in that, and this went through a DPZ, but it wasn't an administration ZRA, but it would have limited the size of senior housing to 1,600 square feet. Talk about what people want. Believe it or not, people are dying to, I don't want to say dying, but they would really, really like to move out of their larger homes into a 1,600 square foot downsized senior home that they could own. And that does not exist in this community, and maybe even in an over 55 community. Those aren't being built, and there's nothing in this plan that says to me, oh, this is what's going to get built, because it's 25,000 apartments. And apartments are rentals. And seniors don't want to leave their homes and go into a rental. That's not what they want.
I think when we get to the dynamic neighborhoods chapter, we'll be able to talk a lot about those missing middle housing types and how they can.
Is it part of the 25,000?
It's a part of the overall strategy for how we're going to build more housing and more dynamic neighborhoods throughout the county.
Okay.
And it's 25 total units. The apartments are only 12,000. Just to
I
reiterate
thought
that.
it was 25,000 plus whatever, which so was 31,000. And I mean, there are a lot of different numbers in here, but
Yeah, it's 25,000 total units projected in the HOCO by design, in the fiscal analysis, and 12,000 of those are apartments. Yeah, right. Is that right? Yeah, okay. So
Okay.
about 40%. And,
Yeah.
and that's anyways, that's
Yeah. And some of those are downtown Columbia, right?
a significant number are downtown Columbia.
yeah, almost all of them.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yes. Which we need to spread some of those out, maybe not the Howard Hughes ones, but the non-Howard Hughes ones.
You mean into other activity centers?
And that would also include activity centers, yes, yep. That would be that too.
You're talking about the subsidized ones, the LIHTC.
Yes, I'm talking
buildings.
about the LIHTC apartments that need to be spread out around the county, which I've said many, many times, instead of putting them all in one place. Yep. And the activity centers. Yes, just because there happen to be 4 village centers or 5 in, well, I guess there's only 4 village centers in my district, but another one right outside of it. Doesn't mean that's the place to put all the apartments either, but yeah. So those are my views. Do you have any last questions? We have captioning until 2 o'clock, and we kept you an extra half an hour. But thank you guys for being so patient.
Thank you for lunch.
I'm also thinking maybe what we should do, I mean, we ask you for a lot of additional information to sort of, so we could compare, this to that. And if you put this number in here, what does it do? How does that look? I don't know if you guys would be willing to come back and look at those numbers with us again. If you're just going to send them to us, or if we could have like a follow-up session to, maybe another hour tacked on to something else so that we could review those numbers again and see what it is how those numbers make a difference in these projections. And I would really love to see what happened 10 years ago.
Yeah, we could get some clarification on that, but.
Okay. David, did you want to ask a last question?
If we wanted you to run a specific scenario, we would need to lay it out in an email and send it to these guys. And we can play with that.
Okay.
Or maybe we can just go and look over Jeff's shoulder while can you change that to that? Can you change
and
that to that?
The county auditor has the model also, so.
Oh, in the, oh, you do? Oh,
Do you also have the information from the fiscal analysis from 10 years ago?
No, I've asked, but I'm not sure there was one actually done.
Yeah, we have it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. You didn't ask recently.
I guess what I asked.
If you asked, it might have been a while back.
No,
Because I would have remembered that, that's all.
no, I guess the question I asked was where do we stand as far as how we, what was the end result? Fiscally.
Right, yeah.
And I don't think we put that in writing to you. I guess it was a conversation.
Okay. So it's basically the same question as Ms. Young. which
Yes,
is
if you could
looking at the
provide that.
past
Look,
20
if you just
okay.
provide it to Craig, that's
Yeah.
fine. And we can get him to run all the scenarios. So you don't have to do it. You've done your work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Act as a
But if you can
consultant.
give Craig
you
the
built
numbers.
the model, which is,
That's the-
that's
Built the
the hard
model,
work.
that's right. You did your work.
Yeah.
That was hard.
Pick on Craig for a while now.
Yeah, make him do a little work. There you go. All right. Anything else? I don't think so. All right. It's been a lovely day. Thank you guys for being here with me all day. I appreciate it. And I appreciate us being able to go forward, so we didn't have to slow the process down. So that was good too. And I think we had a lot of good conversations, and appreciate all of your input and insights and information. Input, insights, information. That was okay. Intuition. Can you think of anything else that starts with an IN? Intelligence. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.